There is a story in the Taoist tradition about a farmer whose horse ran away. His neighbors came to commiserate. "What terrible luck," they said. "What a loss." The farmer said, "Maybe." The next day, the horse returned and brought with it 3 wild horses from the hills. The neighbors came back. "What wonderful luck," they said. "What abundance." The farmer said, "Maybe." The following week, the farmer's son was trying to break one of the wild horses and was thrown. He broke his leg badly. The neighbors returned. "What terrible misfortune," they said. "What suffering." The farmer said, "Maybe." The following month, the army came through the village, conscripting young men for a war that would kill most of them. The farmer's son, with his broken leg, was passed over. The neighbors came back, said nothing this time, because they were beginning to understand that they did not know what anything meant yet. This story is over 2,000 years old. It appears in texts attributed to Lao Tzu in the tradition that flows from the Tao Te Ching, from the I Ching, from the Confucian understanding of failure as the essential teacher that success can never be. And it contains the whole of what Chinese philosophy has to say about the thing we call failure, which is, at its most honest, simply an event whose meaning we have declared before we have enough information to declare it. We live inside a culture that has made failure into a verdict, not a temporary condition, not an event in the ongoing story of a life that has not yet reached its conclusion, a verdict delivered by the market, by the institution, by the particular ruthlessness of a meritocratic system that has no patience for the complexity of the farmer's story and needs, for its own efficiency, to sort people quickly into columns. The column of people who succeeded, the column of people who did not. And what this verdict does to the person sitting inside the failure in the weeks and months after the business closed or the marriage ended or the creative project met the silence that creative projects sometimes meet is something the culture does not want to discuss, because discussing it honestly would require acknowledging that the verdict was premature, that the farmer's story is always still in progress, that the broken leg and the conscription army are always somewhere down the road waiting to reveal what the failure actually was. Chinese philosophy, across 3 distinct traditions that agree on almost nothing else, agrees on this. Failure is not the opposite of wisdom. It is, under the right conditions, handled in the right spirit, understood through the right philosophical framework, the primary source of it. The Tao Te Ching was written, according to tradition, and possibly fiction, by Lao Tzu, an archivist in the Zhou dynasty court, sometime around the 6th century BC. He was reportedly leaving civilization, walking west into the wilderness, done with the world, when a border guard asked him to write down what he knew before he disappeared. He produced 81 verses, the most translated text in Chinese history after the Confucian classics, a text so compressed, so deliberately paradoxical, so resistant to the kind of systematic extraction that Western philosophical tradition expects, that scholars have been arguing about what it means for 2,500 years. What it says about failure, about the things that do not work, the efforts that collapse, the plans undone by circumstances, is not what you expect. It says, good. Not with cruelty, with the specific, calm, completely unfrightened equanimity of a philosophy that has looked at the structure of reality and noticed something that the culture of achievement cannot afford to acknowledge. The Tao, the way, the underlying pattern of how things actually move, does not proceed in straight lines, does not advance through accumulation, does not build toward a destination by eliminating all detour and deviation. It proceeds the way water proceeds, finding the low places, moving around obstacles rather than through them, accomplishing the most by insisting on the least. And failure, in the Taoist understanding, is usually the moment when you have been moving against the grain of the Tao rather than with it, when the effort has been excessive, the direction wrong, the attachment to a particular outcome so complete that you could not feel the gentle, persistent pressure of reality trying to redirect you. The collapse is not the tragedy. The collapse is the information.
The I Ching, the Book of Changes, is the oldest of the Chinese classics, 3,000 years old at minimum, possibly older. A system of 64 hexagrams that describe every possible condition of human experience in the language of change, of things moving from one state to another, of the moment before transition and the moment after, of the specific, gentle, philosophical character of where you are right now in the cycle. The I Ching has no concept of a permanent state, no hexagram called success that once achieved can be maintained indefinitely. No hexagram called failure that once arrived at defines the permanent condition of the person inside it. Every hexagram contains within it the seed of its transformation. The 64th hexagram, the very last one in the sequence, is called before completion, not after completion, before. The Chinese philosophical tradition built its primary oracular text around the understanding that completion is not the goal, that the ongoing movement, the change, the transition, the moment of not yet knowing that we call failure in the I Ching calls simply the current hexagram, is the whole of what a human life is. There is no arrival. There is only the quality of your attention to where you are, right now, in the turning. Confucius, whom most Westerners think of as a teacher of social propriety and hierarchical order, said something about failure that his reputation in the West has almost entirely obscured. He failed spectacularly, spent 13 years traveling the states of Zhou China, attempting to find a ruler who would implement his philosophy of governance, was rejected everywhere, returned home at 68, having accomplished nothing he had set out to accomplish, and spent the rest of his life teaching students and editing the classical texts. The Analects, the record of his conversations with his students, are full of his reflections on this failure, and what they contain is not the bitterness of a man who was not received, not the philosophical repositioning of a man who has decided that what he wanted was wrong anyway. They contain the specific, patient, completely undiscouraged wisdom of a man who understood that the 13 years of rejection were not separate from his life's work. They were his life's work. He said, "It does not matter how slowly you go as long as you do not stop." He said, "Our greatest glory is not in never falling, but in rising every time we fall." He said these things not as consolation, not as the self-help reframing of a man who needed to feel better about his circumstances, as description, as the honest account of what he had observed across 68 years of trying and failing and trying again, about the actual structure of a life worth living. There is a concept in Chinese philosophy, specific to the Daoist tradition, that I want to name carefully, because it is the most practically useful idea in this entire script, and it is the one that the Western philosophical tradition has no adequate equivalent for. The concept is Wu Wei, usually translated as non-action, or effortless action, or action in accordance with the natural flow of things. But the translation always loses something, because Wu Wei is not about passivity. It is not about doing nothing. It is about doing the right thing, in the right way, at the right moment, without the excessive force, the wrong-directioned effort, the attachment to a predetermined outcome that characterizes the kind of striving, that produces the kind of failure that feels like a verdict rather than information. Lao Tzu writes, "Act without acting. Work without working. Taste, the tasteless. This is paradox in service of precision. The action that does not announce itself as action. The work that does not resist the shape of what it is working with. The following of the grain of the wood rather than cutting against it, which produces more with less force and leaves the surface intact. Every major failure, examined honestly through the lens of Wu Wei, reveals the same thing. The place where force was applied against the natural direction, where the effort was excessive and the grain of the wood was being cut across rather than with, where the attachment to a particular outcome made it impossible to feel the gentle, persistent pressure of reality trying to show you a different direction. The failure is the grain of the wood, speaking. Now, the bridge. Because the Daoist farmer in the I Ching 64 hexagrams and Confucius's 13 years of rejection are all pointing toward the same practical question, and it is not a philosophical question. It is the question you are carrying right now, or the one you have been carrying for a year, or 5 years, or a decade. The specific failure that is not yet resolved into the meaning the farmer's story eventually produced. The collapse that is still just a collapse. The broken leg that has not yet revealed the army it was protecting you from. In the culture's instruction to recover quickly, to extract the lesson efficiently, to pivot toward the next effort with the failure processed and filed and no longer interfering with forward momentum, is the instruction that Chinese philosophy, across 3 traditions in 3,000 years, says is exactly wrong. Not because failure should be permanent, because the failure that is rushed through, processed efficiently, reframed quickly, pivoted away from before its full information has been received, will return, in a different form, in a different area of the same life, with the same information, delivered more forcefully, until you are finally willing to receive it. The Tao does not run out of patience. It has all the time the river has.
Here is what Chinese philosophy asks of you, practically, today. First, sit with the failure before you name it. The farmer said maybe, not this is bad, not this is good, maybe. The honest acknowledgement that you do not yet have enough information to render the verdict the culture is demanding you render. Whatever the failure is, the one you are in the middle of, or the one from 5 years ago that you resolved too quickly, sit with it for 1 week without the reframe, without the silver lining, without the story about what it means and what it was for, and how it made you who you are. Just the thing as it is in its current hexagram, not yet named. Notice what information arrives in the not naming, what the failure is showing you about the direction of your efforts, the grain of the wood, the place where force was applied against the natural movement of your life. Here is what Chinese philosophy asks of you, practically, today. Second, find the Wu Wei direction. Every failure has a Wu Wei reading, a question you can ask of it that the culture of achievement does not ask, not what went wrong, but where was I cutting against the grain? Not to assign blame, to identify the natural direction that the failure was redirecting you toward, the thing that wanted to happen but couldn't because the attachment to a different outcome was too strong. The river's course that your dam was blocking, and that the dam's collapse is now revealed. Write it down, 1 sentence, the direction the failure was pointing toward that you were too committed to the other direction to see. Third, consult the 64th hexagram. Before completion, the I Ching's reminder that you are always in the middle of the story, that the current hexagram, however it feels, is not the last one, that the sequence is always turning, and where you are right now is not available until you can see where it was turning toward. Ask,
If this failure is not the conclusion but a transition, what is it transitioning toward? Not what you want it to be transitioning toward. What if you follow the wu-wei direction, if you move with the grain rather than against it, seems to want to happen next? Hold the answer lightly. The farmer held his answers lightly. Maybe.
Fourth, do what Confucius did. He failed to change the world in the way he intended, returned home, taught students, edited texts, did the work that was available to him from the position the world had assigned him after the rejection, with the same completeness, the same seriousness, the same total commitment that he had brought to the effort that failed. Identify the work that is available to you from inside the failure, not the work you would be doing if the failure hadn't happened, the work that is specifically only available because it did. The students Confucius taught during those final years, the analects they recorded, the tradition they carried forward, became more consequential than anything the 13 years of political effort could have produced. The work available from inside the failure is sometimes the whole point. I want to close with a passage from the Tao Te Ching, chapter 17, one of the shortest in the collection, 5 lines in the original Chinese, each one carrying more compression than most paragraphs. Lao Tzu writes about the highest kind of leader, but the principle extends to the highest kind of life. When the work is done and it succeeds, the people all say, "We did it ourselves." We did it ourselves. The highest achievement in the Taoist understanding is the achievement that does not announce itself as achievement, the work that followed the grain so precisely, the effort that aligned with the natural direction so completely that no one, including the person doing it, can quite locate where the force was applied. This is the opposite of the culture of failure is verdict and success is trophy. This is the understanding that the Tao does not keep score, that the river does not celebrate arriving at the sea, that the work done in wu-wei, in the quiet, effortless grain-following alignment with what wants to happen, leaves no evidence of struggle because there was no struggle against the current. The horse ran away. Maybe. The horse came back with 3 others. Maybe. The son broke his leg. Maybe. The army came and went, and the farmer, who had never decided what anything meant before it was finished, was still there, still working, still holding every verdict lightly, still saying to everything the world called failure and everything the world called success with the complete equanimity of a man who understood that neither verdict was the last word. Maybe. Here is the question the Tao of failure leaves us with today, not from certainty, not from the resolved end of the farmer's story, from the middle of it, which is where we always are. What failure, current or past, named or still being sat with, have you declared a verdict on before the story was finished? And what direction, what grain, what wu-wei, what natural movement of your life that the failure was trying to redirect you toward, have you been too committed to the other direction to see? Leave that in the comments, because that answer, your farmer's answer, held lightly without the verdict, is not a small thing. It is the maybe, which is always, in the Taoist tradition, the beginning of the actual answer. I'll see you in the next one.